Welcome to today's Canyon Conversation, everybody. Today I'm joined by Nicki Frey. Nicki is an associate wildlife professor for USU Extension Service down in Cedar City. Nicki, thank you so much for joining us today. Nicki, go ahead and tell us, I know you have a lot of different
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you've got a lot of different projects going on. Tell us what you're working on and what you wanted to share with us today. I know there was one project we were thinking of talking about.
Well, yeah, I do have a lot going on. My position is really focused on human-wildlife conflicts and human-wildlife interactions, and there are a lot of them in southern Utah. So it's basically any time that we have a wild animal that is on private lands and maybe not behaving properly, or just that human-wildlife conflict with humans recreating in more wildland environments lately. So I generally deal with that, but specifically, I've been working a lot with free roaming horses and their interaction with wildland habitats, and Utah prairie dogs, which are a threatened species, and also with greater sage grouse, which are the largest grouse species in North America. They're in the turkey family, so they're just a little bit smaller than a turkey. So I've been working with them.
Yeah. Yeah, those are very large birds. I know they're larger than I expected the first time I saw one.
Yeah, they're big. So those are the kind of the big things that I'm doing, and I've been working down here since 2004. So we've done a lot of different projects on those species.
Great. What does a day in your life look like? It probably depends on the day, but or maybe the aspect of the job.
Oh my goodness. I love working for Extension because my day's never boring. So I have graduate students that are doing the bigger research projects. So I have a couple graduate students that are working on greater sage grouse right now, and they're looking at how sage grouse, what the habitat looks like for sage grouse going forward into the future with a warmer, drier climate. And we live on the southern margin of sage grouse distribution. And in fact, the sage grouse populations I look at are the southernmost birds in the nation. And so as the climate gets warmer and drier, that habitat's going to go away because it's already not that great, given that it's the southern edge. So two of my graduate students are looking at, like, do we have the habitat to support them in the future, and what is that habitat going to look like?
Yeah, it's a big question, probably, I think, with a lot of species as our climate warms, for sure.
Yeah, it's a challenging one. And then the other graduate student is working on looking at ravens and how ravens are interacting with sage grouse. We have horses or cattle and sheep. The ravens have found a way to live in these drier climates where they didn't exist before. And so they're also learning how to eat sage grouse eggs really well. That is a challenge. So it's sort of a double whammy where the climate's getting drier and the habitat's not that great anymore. And now you have a predator that's coming in and eating more eggs and having more predation pressure than they had before.
I imagine that's pretty challenging with ravens. I've worked with ravens in a captive setting, and they're really intelligent birds. In my experience, we can train them to do pretty amazing things, and they'll pick up human words even. Does that make it harder?
It does make it harder, to the point where even trying to study the impact of them is difficult, because anything we do changes what would happen in a normal setting, because we're there and the ravens are watching us. So for example, we're looking at just trying to document how much raven pressure is on these nests, and we have to set up artificial nests at night in the dark so that the ravens can't see us setting them up, because if they see us setting them up, then they're going to come in to investigate what we're doing, which then changes what would actually happen in nature. So we are like in stealth mode, trying to set out this study without the ravens seeing us.
Like, we're not here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's challenging. So when you're in the field, I guess, doing these projects, what does that look like? Are you utilizing like cameras? Or are you just hunkering down in the dark to watch them? How do you do that?
Oh, well, so with the more traditional sage grouse studies, where we're looking at the habitat that they're using, we actually have radio telemetry, satellite radio telemetry. And hold on, I have an example. I will get it, because they're always hanging out on my windowsill. So this is a satellite transmitter for sage grouse, and it fits on their back.
Okay, yeah.
And this kind of hangs out over their tail. And it's solar powered. So this is a little mini solar panel right there.
Yep.
And it goes and it gets GPS locations on the satellites, and then that comes to our computer, and we can then go out to those locations and measure the habitat that they were in. So we know for a fact that they were at that spot. And we go out there and we measure how high the shrubs were, how much grass was there, what kind of forbs were there, how far was it from a road, those things. And then with the ravens, there's a lot of driving around, counting how many ravens we see on a daily basis. Every week, they drive the same roads, and you count how many ravens you see, and you get a bit of an index.
Yeah. Kind of that.
And then we have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Kind of like a nice baseline to refer back to, and you can see how those numbers change. I'm sure if you're doing that all the time. Yeah.
Yes. And then we have 80 trail cameras set up on looking at nests. And the trail cameras are mini trail cameras, so very much like the ones that people see out for hunters and things like that take a photo whenever an infrared beam is crossed. So whenever there's motion, it takes a picture. But these ones are about this big. A normal one is like that big. These are mini. They're like this big.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot smaller then.
Yeah, and so we put them up. We put them up like 3 feet from the nest, and we document what comes in to investigate the nest.
What are you finding investigating the nest? Ravens, obviously. Anything else?
Lots and lots of ravens. Yeah, yes. Nothing else. Actually, nothing else has been documented taking the eggs except for ravens.
Oh, interesting. I would not have expected that. It's very interesting.
I know. And usually, I guess I was expecting to see badgers or coyotes.
I would as well. Yeah.
I'm doing another raven study at the Red Cliffs Desert Reserve in Washington County, and we're looking at raven depredation pressure on baby desert tortoise. So we have little artificial tortoises like this big, and we put them out and about in tortoise habitat, and we have cameras on them, and we watch and see what animals try to take a baby tortoise. And it's nailed down to the ground, so they can't take it, but we can get a picture of it.
Yeah.
And yes, we have ravens, but we also have bobcats, we have badgers, we have coyotes, we have kit foxes. So we were expecting some of those up here in Iron County, but we haven't seen anything yet.
That's it. That's really interesting. I would have expected a lot of other predators to be after both sage grouse and baby tortoises. Interesting. Is there anything, I guess, you work with the human aspect too. Is there anything humans can be doing to maybe deter these ravens from moving in? They're already here, so it's probably hard at this point.
Yeah, it's kind of a done deal, but there's really not much that we can do as a citizen. Of course, little things like keeping your trash in your trash bin, not feeding, and keeping rubbish out. Those are more the things, but most of the effort comes from our cattlemen, and they are doing things like when they have their pits that they dispose carcasses in, bulldozing soil on top of that so that the ravens can't get that. There's a lot of work being done at landfills to try to make sure that the refuse at the landfill is covered up more regularly so that the ravens aren't finding food within these landfills. So the things that need to be done on a grander scale.
Yeah.
Than the average urban
individual citizen. Yeah. Interesting. So tell me a little bit about, I mean, what are you discovering as far as, I guess, the population of both the sage grouse and the tortoises because of these ravens? Have you noticed any trends yet as far as how the ravens are impacting those populations?
Yeah, so nationally, there's been a lot of studies being done on ravens' impact on sage grouse. And we do know that in other areas that have studied them, about 70% of the nest depredation is because of ravens. So we're seeing nesting success declining for sage grouse because of the ravens. And then some of the other things that have been documented that we haven't noticed yet, we're trying, but it's sort of hard, is people are reporting ravens coming down and harassing the sage grouse when they're trying to reproduce. So imagine, it's kind of hard to explain. It's called a lek. And what happens is the leading male stands in this bare spot of ground, and then it kind of rings out from there like lesser males, stage themselves on this bare area, and they strut and prance about and make this funny noise. And the females mate with the best strutter. And what happens is the ravens are coming down and harassing the males so that they can't strut, which interrupts the reproductive efforts. So we've been hearing that, but we haven't been able to document that, because the only way to document that is to somehow be there in a truck watching the sage grouse do this, and then just happen to be there the day that the ravens are there. We've been trying to set up cameras around the perimeter of the lek and document it. But the leks aren't on the exact same spot every day. They sort of shift up and down a given area. So we haven't, but we've been trying.
Error for sure, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit.
Well, I was going to tell you about the tortoises. So the tortoises, again, throughout the Mojave Desert, we've documented that ravens are causing significant mortality of baby desert tortoises. And they have a fairly low success rate anyway. That's the type of reproduction that they do. There's a lot of offspring hatched, and then only a few make it to maturity. But the ravens seem to be capitalizing even more on that and reducing that success rate. So, for example, there's been cases in California where under one raven nest, scientists have counted like over 70 tortoise shells.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot.
So, and because they're so smart, they find where that nest is, and they just get every hatchling that comes out of there.
Mm-hmm.
So we have cases around the Red Cliffs Desert Reserve where it seems to me, and again, this is just my best guess, that there's a pair of ravens that found a hatchling concentration. And what they're doing is they're taking the hatchlings, picking them up, and then flying over a residential area, and they're dropping them on concrete to crack open the shells.
Yeah.
And then kill the tortoise and eat them. So the citizens have been reporting to Red Cliffs Desert Reserve, hey, I found these baby tortoise shells. in my backyard.
Mhm.
So every time anybody finds one, of course, they report it to Red Cliffs, and there's a concentration of them in this one area where we know there's a raven nest. So it's a very clear indication that one pair of ravens can really take
Do a
on.
lot of damage. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a lot of tortoises. Yeah, especially it's been a while since I've looked at the desert tortoise status. Are they still classified as endangered or are they threatened? I don't honestly know at this
They're
point.
definitely endangered.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
what I thought.
And
Yeah.
right now, raven depredation is the #1 factor keeping them from their populations from increasing.
Wow. Yeah. That's that's so challenging. I mean, I don't, yeah, what do you do about that? That's hard.
It is really hard because, and this is where the whole human wildlife conflict and human wildlife interaction comes in, because the ravens are native,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're
Yeah.
only doing what they're meant to do.
Yep.
And it's the fact we change the environment to allow these large populations of ravens. So
Mm-hmm.
technically it's our fault for this.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
which makes
Definitely.
it even worse.
Yeah.
It makes us feel worse. Like we're like, oh my
It
gosh,
does.
this is a human caused problem. And look what it's doing to all these other things. Now, how do we fix this? Because the raven hasn't done anything. The raven's just being a raven.
Raven's not doing anything wrong. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But in some of these areas where, I mean, we've calculated a 400% increase in ravens in the last 20 years. So it's it's like a it's getting to the point where it's like a plague.
Yeah. Hmm.
So
That's interesting. So with this research, I mean, are you trying to figure out ways to, I guess, I don't know what it would be to reduce the raven back to more natural numbers or to find ways to protect these nests? Or is right now, is it still just trying to gather that raw data?
so right now, what we're doing down in southern Utah is we're really just at the baseline stage for the greater sage grouse on
Mhm.
if what nests get depredated and what nests don't.
Yeah.
And is there something about the nests that don't get depredated that we can capitalize on and try to make more of that? So if it's a certain height of sagebrush or a certain density of grass that protects them, can we make that happen?
Mhm.
Um, and and then the other one is trying to reduce nesting substrate for ravens, but that's more difficult because they nest on power line poles, they nest on transmission lines, they nest in sheds, they nest in trees. So that's more difficult. But over the last 20 years, I would say, well, since 2005 at least, that we have what's called the Watershed Restoration Initiative in Utah. And
Mhm.
we've been really focusing in southern Utah on removing junipers and pinyon trees to try to recreate sagebrush habitat. It's natural that the pinyons and junipers encroach into sagebrush, and traditionally we would have fires that would rejuvenate the sagebrush and eliminate the trees. But it's hard for us to let fires go down in southern
Yes.
Utah because we now have cheatgrass. And so when an area burns, if there's cheatgrass in the area, then the cheatgrass comes in, and the cheatgrass doesn't help anything. No, there's no animal that loves cheatgrass, so it's not good. So we've been going in, the BLM, the Forest Service, and the state come in and they mechanically remove it and try to let the sagebrush come back in. So a lot of what we're focusing on is looking to see if those treatments have created the habitat that would be the most beneficial for sage grouse, because it's a way of rejuvenating new stands of sagebrush, which often means that there's more grasses and there are more flowering plants, and that creates more a diversity in cover. So if you think like if the ravens flying overhead, a thick, healthy sagebrush creates the cover from a bird looking down,
More
but the
protection.
grasses and the flowers create protection if the bird's on the ground looking forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So just more cover, more camouflage for those nests.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
So we're looking specifically at those areas that have recently been treated and seeing if they're creating the habitat that we need to help the sage grouse. And then
Interesting.
if they are, what is it about that that's helping the most?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see if it's, like you said, the diversity of grasses and sagebrush, or there's
Mhm.
one particular one that helps more. Interesting.
And then the other thing that is in the works, but is really kind of tentative, is looking at the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which is what protects ravens from human disturbance.
Yeah.
So right now they're protected. Almost all birds are protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and so we can't just randomly kill a raven that we think is causing
Yeah. Of course not. Yeah.
so, which is good. We don't want people to be
We
able
don't
to do
want
that.
people randomly. Yeah.
But we are thinking of ways that maybe we could get a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service that would allow managers or trained personnel to remove raven nests from substrate.
Manage that population more.
Because we know that it's the raven that's has a brood or a clutch of offspring that's doing most of the depredation. So most of the eating of eggs and the killing of the desert tortoise hatchlings are from mated ravens that are trying to rear their young. So if we can get a permit to pull down those nests before they have eggs in them, so we're not actually like destroying eggs, or we're not destroying chicks, but if you see a raven building a nest in the spring, you can quickly go in and just remove that nest.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, before they lay those eggs, and before. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I'm trying to think, is there anything else you would like to share with our viewers about these projects? I learned so much. I found it fascinating.
Well, I would say that the greater sage grouse is an amazing bird. In working with them since 2005, I'm still learning. They're very resilient, and they can really adapt to the changing environment. So we really hope that they'll find ways to adapt to the changing climates here in southern Utah. Some of the ways that we've already seen them adapt is that we're seeing them using shade trees to avoid the heat of the day, which is unusual. Usually we tell people that they don't like trees. And in fact, when they're nesting, they'll avoid areas that have trees. But we are seeing them in July and August taking their broods into trees just to protect them from the heat. So if they can do that and avoid predators in those trees, then that might be a strategy. The other thing that we see them doing when it's really, really hot are spending time more in agricultural areas where they can hang out in catchment ponds or in irrigated pastures and things like that.
And some water.
So, yeah, and get some water. So we can work with agricultural producers so that they can time when they harvest their hay. It's at the times where they're not going to accidentally harvest a sage grouse and her brood, which has happened, unfortunately. I have found one of my transmitters in a hay bale, so we'll know to look out for that. But there it's not doom and gloom. We are finding ways that to help the sage grouse, and the sage grouse know how to help themselves. They've been here for thousands and thousands of years. This probably isn't the first time that they've had excessive heat.
Yep. I've had to adapt before, I'm sure, somehow. Yeah.
Yeah. But the one thing is that they did used to, their populations did extend into Arizona at one point. And so they've been slowly receding northward over time. So it may just be the natural change that we see sage grouse distributions kind of ending farther north, but
Mhm.
that means that they would extend farther north into Alberta and places like that. So
That's true. It doesn't necessarily mean the range shrinks, it just kind of shifts northward.
yeah, just
Yeah.
go somewhere else. And
Yeah.
so part of our research is to notice that, is to say, okay, well, let's not do treatments over here because that's just in the future, that's just going to be a very, very dry habitat. So let's not waste time and money over here so we're trying to project and figure out what's going to be good habitat in 10 years and help that habitat.
Yeah. So look into the future and doing what you can to protect that future
Yeah,
habitat and good habitat.
features.
Yeah.
And a
Yeah.
lot of times what managers do is reactive, right? The managers see something happening and then react to that. And so our job with extension is to try to find a way to make them proactive and know what to look forward to and to what to plan for.
Yeah. Well, so interesting and such. Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be so valuable going into the future. And I greatly enjoyed learning about these research projects. So
Good.
thank you so much for taking time out of your morning to join us, Nikki. Um, Guys, we are trying to shift Candy Conversations back up to the Nature Center. So I will tell our viewers to keep an eye on localnature.org on the calendar to see what future Candy Conversations are coming. And thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks again.